Welcome to a special episode of TAMA Talks with a Curator, brought to you by the Torrance Art Museum Advocates. I'm Janine Madden, current TAMA president, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Today we'll be discussing the show that's currently on view in the main gallery at the Torrance Art Museum called Risky Business, a Painter's Forum. The focus of the show seeks to address how the concerns and expectations of AI begin to dominate the narrative in our increasingly technologically dependent society. Some artists reply with the personal mark, risk-taking, chance, the unknown endpoint, the illogical, or the mystery to produce a reflection of a living, very human experience. The exhibition is on view through May 4th. The museum is located at 3320 Civic Center Drive in Torrance, California, and is open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission to the Torrance Art Museum is free and donations are gratefully accepted. This discussion is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel with all of our previous TAMA Talks. You can access it from our website at www.tamadvocates.com. We are joined today by the co-curator and artist, Marie Thibeault. Over the course of 4 decades, Thibeault's studio work has been dedicated to exploring the effects of the environmental strain on the landscape, creating large-scale paintings that blend a complex abstract language with imagery of locations altered by the effects of climate-related trauma. Her compositions allude to the state of collapse, though stabilized within an atmospheric color field. Thibeault paints to bear witness, deepen empathy, and visualize our interconnectedness to the landscape, while also reflecting a sense of precarious balance. She is the co-curator of Risky Business, a Painter's Forum at the Torrance Art Museum, and she has a piece in the show as well. And today she will share with us some behind-the-scenes perspectives on curating a show at the TAM, as well as providing some insight about both the artistic and the curatorial process. So welcome, Marie. We're really glad that you could join us today.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me and for doing this for the artists and for everyone to understand the show.
Great. Well, what I have prepared today is just a sampling of some of the work that's at the show currently. We'll do it sort of as a teaser because at the end of the day, really, these TAMA Talks are primarily designed to get people to go into the museum who may not have been there before. It's always surprising to us how many folks who live in Torrance and the South Bay who don't know that there's an art museum in Torrance. And this show in particular is really a highlighting the work of some extraordinarily talented artists about whom we will discuss today. So here's a great, this is really a great picture because Max does not like to have his picture taken. So great picture of you and Max Presneal, who, for those who are unfamiliar, Max is the current director and lead curator, head curator at the Torrance Art Museum. And the two of you together worked on this show. So tell us a little bit about that process of working with Max.
Okay, so it started really over a year ago. And I just came up with this idea of wanting to, propose a painting show that we really needed to see, a really powerful painting show. I know painters on the East Coast that I visit and communicate with. We have crit groups online and people in Northern California. And I know many painters in Los Angeles, but I wanted everyone to come together and meet each other and to exchange ideas. And so I dreamed up this sort of bi-coastal exhibit. But I wanted it to be about a type of painting that was unmediated, that was not a direct copy of something that was created on through machines like through an app or a process like Photoshop or AI, because I noticed that there was a trend in painting that was becoming very thin, in terms of its sort of process and surface, and the interest that was, for me, it wasn't as interesting as something that is more mysterious and has a more personalized process. So the idea of the process led to thinking about, what is it in painting that that I do and that I admire in painting, especially, modern to contemporary painting. And I realized that I really value the strategies of risk and chance. And risk and chance have been strategies, creating accidents and responding to accidents in the work. Consciously, deliberately throwing something unknown so that the artist would have to problem solve and figure out new solutions to the composition. So that led to the title Risky Business, like, because all of this, you have to take a risk. And in my own work, there's a huge amount of risk that I employ, and I value it more and more because it keeps me learning and it keeps me inventive. So Max and I then got together and he agreed, and we started to brainstorm over the following months, like what artists might be the best for the show. And then we came up with this list of artists, all painters. So it's more about a painting process than any other media.
So this is your piece that you have in the show. So you have this unique opportunity to both curate and be a part of the show. Wild Gravity, is that the piece? This is the piece that you have?
Yeah, that's my most recent painting that was in the show. And yeah, this painting is, again, a part of a series that I'm doing about my responses to the local landscape. Specifically a canyon that I walk in that is now collapsing because of the, the violent rains we've had, and following drought, following fires. And so I'm seeing this incredible instability, yet kind of, beauty that's still there, that sort of dislocation and fragmentation that happens, that we're seeing more and more of. So this painting is about things, obviously being pulled with gravity, and the wildness of unpredictability of the new sort of climate that we're dealing with worldwide now.
Did you create it specifically in response to this show, knowing that you were going to be hanging a piece in it?
I would say yes and no. I would say I just keep working, and like the one that I feel is the most, finished at that time that I haven't shown. I had just gotten finished with, well, at this point, 10 of my new paintings were in a solo show, so I didn't have a lot to choose from. So luckily that one got finished up in time for the, Risky Business show. So I was happy about that.
Okay, good, good. What's the medium?
It's oil on canvas.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's created with a lot of layers. Like, you'll see much of the work in the show has, different sort of intuitive, they're employing different intuitive processes, but I'm very interested in how each artist is different, and like how they use that to create content. So for me, it creates a surprise sort of juxtaposition, and I see things freshly.
Yes.
And for other artists, it reveals things, or it sort of compounds things. And it's really not a new way of thinking about painting, but it's something that I felt needed to be spotlighted, because we're such an image-based and information-based culture right now, that there's more to painting than the image. And the exhibit, you'll see there's a lot of abstraction, although not all of it is abstraction.
Right, right. Well, we're going to get to a lot of that as we cycle through the artists. This piece I chose to include because I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that the installation process, when people ship their work and then it all comes, there's the whole process of figuring out, where things go and what should be next to what, without necessarily competing. And I think several of the artists have done TAMA talks already. And one of the areas of agreement was that this show kind of coalesced very well together, that it was placed, that pieces were placed nearby other pieces that actually enhanced the work. And there was really no visual competition between the pieces, which was very much appreciated by the artists, I will say. So, and also I'll put in a little plug because as a TAMA member, at various levels, you actually can get the opportunity to come in while the staff at the TAM is putting up a show. And so I'll give you our website at the end of it, but that's a very unique process that a lot of people don't have an opportunity to be a part of, is watching that show, a show like this, come together. And here it is hung. So again, this is in the main gallery. Some of these pieces we will talk about today. So this first piece, The Kid in His Boombox by Michael Mancari. Tell us a little bit about what you might have learned from Michael, or what you might talk about if you were describing this or doing a walkthrough with this particular piece.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's it's a piece that's really based on fluid gesture. Some of it is spray paint, some of it is iconography. I know it's like urban iconography. Like the boombox might reference that. And connected to graffiti. So there's a lineage in painting where low art, such as graffiti, is incorporated into high art, such as painting.
Yes.
And Max is also a painter, so he is more in the school of using this coded gesture, I would say. It's gesture, but it has codes that you can connect to some imagery, some maybe text in there, but definitely to graffiti. But I like this one because it's very lyrical and airy. It tends to sort of hang in space, yet it stays very, very active with its sort of linear language, and the language is both, sort of like script, but also graffiti, but it's also like a linear structure, which you'll see in many of the paintings. There's either drawing or linear structure, or there could be shape or, color field. There's different sort of territories that the artists use. And so he's in this territory of writing and like just, continual gesture.
Right, that kind of mark making.
Mark making.
This is SNDSC by Chris Truman.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Truman is interested in, I'm, again, like, this painting is pretty much a pure abstraction. I see it, really communicating with the language of light and color. And I think he's interested in cyberspace, synthetic light, and as well as, natural phenomenon. So he's trying to, I think, meld these two. I could be wrong about this, but he's trying to meld this kind of sensation that we get when we're online, and we get this kind of technological sublime, the endless, illuminated world that you see, within the cyberspace. And he's using that also as codes. So it becomes a part of a vocabulary within the painting. And then the other vocabulary is the kind of chroma that has, saturation and various patterns to it. But I think it's like, the question is, what are we looking at in terms of, is it natural? Is it synthetic? What kind of phenomenon is colliding here? So I
Right.
think it challenges the viewer to kind of, you know, grapple with those associations too.
Absolutely. And you bring up a very good point in that the one thing about a show like this is that it does require looking, right? You want to stand in front of these pieces and sort of just immerse yourself in them to gain a sense of their magnitude. There's just so much involved in each one that it's I think when we looked at this piece, when we looked here, there's something to be said for one piece on a wall, right? Because it's not competing with the other pieces, and you can spend time in front of it in isolation, just looking at the one piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's really nicely.
Well, yeah, I mean, that sort of supports the whole premise of the show too, because it's about the handmade and it's about the object. So text, you don't need a lot of text to read it's going to explain it. It's more of an experiential encounter. And that's what's so wonderful about painting is that, like you said, you spend time in front of it and it reveals different levels of meaning. And if you try to understand the way something is made, if you have that interest, then, sympathetically, you also are making and unmaking the thing. So you are experiencing this time-based process of creativity. So that's different than a lot of, some contemporary exhibits, which you have to read a ton of text and it's very didactic.
Right.
So this is a different experience of, yeah, intuition and sensory. But I have a lot to say about that, so we can talk about that at any point.
Okay. Lilian Tomasco's Portrait of a Storm, stormy yet optimistic.
Well, like this painting is on aluminum, which is pretty interesting to see. When you see this kind of really brushy, it looks like it's completely, almost a crop gesture. But there's something very luminous and fresh about it. And I looked at it up close, and it's on aluminum with acrylic, and it looks extremely spontaneous, but it's actually pretty locked in with strategic decisions that are hard to see at first, but then you start to see especially negative shapes and edges and what might be on top of or behind is sort of locked in, and that's again the formal language of abstraction. But
Sure.
what she's doing is kind of the impression of something carefree and optimistic, but it's actually pretty rigorous in her painting process and how she constructs it.
It's a nice example of a piece that you really do want to appreciate in person. So if you're watching and you can get to I'm a little far away, but if you're watching and you can get to the museum, the way that the material on which these are created lends itself also to the whole experience of looking at the work. So you said this is on aluminum?
Yeah, so there's a very very hard, smooth surface that's almost mirrored in a sense, like the aluminum.
Mhm.
It's so there's light that comes through that, but there's also light from the color itself, and it's a very thin veiling between that. And you can tell she's been working with this for a while because she gets very clear information on this ground of aluminum. It's beautiful.
This is Goddess of Discord by Fatima Burns.
Well, yeah, I mean, you probably know more about this painting because you talked with her.
Next week we will
Oh,
have
next week.
next week. So we will be having a TAMA talk with
Oh, okay.
on the
With
25th
Fatima.
coming
And
up.
I mean, this is again, it's sort of an automatic writing. It has this sort of roots in surrealism, or very early modernist sort of abstraction. it just reminds me of some surreal work that was done around World War One. It has many different portals of information that float in a activated, very, very pale field. I mean, the field itself has very thick paint, and then there's areas that are very thin. There are like, I think it might be a discussion of a war machine or some type of anxiety about that. There is places that look like weapons and little bullets, and then there are places that look like flowers and tears. And that's what I got from the painting. There's a narrative going on. A lot of the painters in the show, think about their abstractions as narrative, abstract narratives, that they're telling a story. And she's definitely telling a story, and she's got a very vast vocabulary of little images, painting surfaces, a lot of different modalities in her work. It's pretty intricate and interesting to see in person.
Okay. Weary World by Ali Smith.
Yeah, and Ali Smith is similar to Fatima in a sense. It's drawing based. She is working with a lyrical drawing process. She has a definite sense of freedom and confidence. She's developing sort of an ongoing, like almost like Michael Moncari, except hers are also veer like Fatima's, to very thin to very thick. And they have sort of a buoyant, almost cartoon-like quality, but they also have a very languishing gesture. There's something very about her personality that, you can almost see these characters. There's almost like a Dr. Seuss quality to the characters in her work. And, she has kind of a fearless painter. She can go and, build a whole vocabulary. This one's fairly thin for her, and some of her paintings are very dense and super thick. But we like this one because it was so open, and it's a little bit unusual for her to leave it this open. Yeah, very intuitive, awesome sort of invention in her work.
Okay. Resuscitated by Barbara Friedman.
Yeah, Barbara was also on the panel discussion with us that we had at the opening. Barbara and I went to school together at RISD and also at Berkeley, so we've known each other our whole lives. And she just has gotten to the place in her inventiveness where she just trusts the process, and she is radically sort of, brave and provoking accident and chance. And then waiting for her imagination to see what is in that field of possibility and coaxing it out into an image. So, she talks about this, pouring and letting the paint coagulate and dry in a certain way, and then seeing what she can pull out from that, often little eyes or creatures or some type of rendering within that field. And it becomes a little bit like spooky, sometimes mostly humorous. That it's great to see more of her work as well, because you can see like the whole vocabulary if you see more than one painting, so.
That you make a really valid point that the idea, we are looking at just one example from a large body of work for the majority of these painters. And so, if you're looking at this piece in isolation, she was very kind to share with us several images of work that she has made in the talk that we did last week. And so you can see that regression. But again, just as you explained, that process of pouring, waiting 5 days for it to dry, and then revisiting the canvas is just, it's just extraordinary. And so, as you said earlier, that idea of creating a narrative that each artist is telling something on the canvas or on the surface of their two-dimensional work. And so it's really quite fascinating to hear everybody's.
And I would add even further that some artists will start with a story and then cover it up, and some start with just pure paint and they put the story on top, like with Barbara,
Yeah.
like it's just kind of like, there's always some kind of recognition, but it could go either way,
Right. As opposed to just the application of paint. It's a very thoughtful process.
Yeah, it's not a predictable one. That's the main difference between this and some other approaches to painting. This has a great level of unpredictability to it.
This is Sharon Barnes' piece, and yes, that One Sweet Song for a Carolina. She did talk about that idea of creating three-dimensionality. It's kind of hard to see on this piece. We both decided, but there are pieces that come off the edge. There's some pieces that are applied afterward that are overlaid. And so she too went into her process quite extensively on her talk. Mm-hmm.
But I can talk about the painting formally. I mean, her work is, really a poetic narrative about her identity. And it's very heartfelt, and she's putting so much emotion into it. Her paintings become physically very rich, and they affect your body, and she sees them as bodies as well. So there is this concept in painting, like that it can become a stand-in for a physical body. And so the texture there is really, really working in that way, as well as the scale of it, how it affects you. And the color is just beautiful and rich and seductive. And, the surface is endlessly interesting with the texture. Yeah.
That's an excellent point in that, this is one of those shows that it's up until May 4th, but if you've seen it already, I would encourage you to go back and look again, because there's always going to be something that you did not see the first time that you look at an individual piece. I don't even mean the whole show. You could go back for 20 days and visit each piece and spend hours in front of it and see something that you hadn't seen previously. So
Yeah.
okay, so this is Singing Tree by Audrey Tulamiera Welsh, and we had a chance to talk yesterday or the day before, and she very graciously included a video clip of her creating this piece. And as you indicated previously, her work is about redaction, that sort of removal, where she puts a masking liquid on, lets it dry, paints, and then removes. So she has an underpainting, and then she puts the masking on and then removes it.
And then I think she also uses tape.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a process of abstraction that, started to become developed, in this country with the abstract expressionists. But, at that point, it was just about mark making. But today we have artists working with, really in-depth personalized language with this. And I would say Audrey is a good example of that, where it's very personalized because it's connected to her story, to mapping, to like memory, and pulling, like you said, redacting, pulling things from what's underneath to the surface. But with her work too, it's very risky, and it's because there's several levels of risk. Just even the pores on top of it, you never know how that's going to work, and you never know how that's going to interact with what's underneath it. And so as she reveals that, fresh sort of information comes forward. So it's a really interesting way to keep moving forward as a painter formally, but also to keep finding different levels of the content of your work, which she seems to reveal with this process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. It was a very interesting conversation, as have all of the talks been, only because they do kind of provide you, I can't put all this on a label. So they do kind of provide you with that little bit of a backstory about, as you were saying, about the mapping and just the various influences that reveal themselves in their work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So this is John Getz's piece that's in the gallery, and we had a very interesting conversation about this piece, about his work, about his process.
I
Large.
mean, yeah, I love this piece, and I just met John. I mean, he was an artist I was not familiar with before this show. I would like to learn more about his motivations too. And you probably know more than me at this point. But I love this painting. It's so absolutely a joy to encounter and to spend time with. There are these white shapes on the surface that are, you know, somewhat textured. I think they might be rolled on with a roller, and underneath it are other shapes that of color, and then there's a linear structure that interweaves between the layers. So it's at a state of sort of opening up and closing, you know, rupture and closure at the same time. It's got a lot of breath and seems to be breathing. Um, and, you know, it's pretty much a painting about what I think is just about really exuberance and joy. I'm not sure if he's trying to discuss something else, but that's what I get from the painting.
Well, that's so interesting because that's what I got from him in the conversation. I mean, there was just sort of an ebullience about him that was infectious, and it was just a wonderfully, you know, a wonderfully informal chat that was lovely because that's exactly how I felt talking with him. And I also get that from the colors that he's chosen to use as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think this is the last slide, I'm going to head to my final slide, but what you've kind of given us today in the short time that we've had, because two things. One is you do have a walkthrough coming up on Saturday at the Torrance Art Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you going through each painting? Will you be talking about each of the 20 paintings?
I think some of the artists are going to join me because I just extended the invitation. So they will be talking probably about their work. And
Wonderful.
I hope to be able to bounce off of them for some ideas. But we will definitely go through the whole exhibit and, you know, spend some time with each painting for sure. And, you know, I'll give some thoughts like I did today about the artist and what I know about their process. And then, you know, try to answer questions from people as we go.
And so, you know, you mentioned that you are an artist, but also that you were part of the curatorial process. What would you say? This was the first show you curated, you said?
Yeah.
But what did you take away from that process?
Well, it was easier than I thought, although very time consuming, you know, for a studio artist.
Mhm.
Um, I am a retired professor of art, so I'm used to doing certain types of research, and this was something I wanted to do to keep that going. I would say that it was just an absolute joy, you know, working with the crew at Torrance Art Museum and Max, and meeting all the artists was wonderful. And to see the overlapping and the dynamics, which my original idea was to get people like painters using similar like philosophies on the East Coast and the West Coast and the Bay Area to come together and talk. And they did, and they networked like crazy. And to me, this was the main reward. On top of that, seeing this show is extremely beautiful show, more than I had imagined it to be. So that's why I recommend to as many people as possible to see the show. And I'm doing the walkthrough to pull people in because it opened the Saturday before Easter, and many people couldn't make it that night. So
Okay.
hopefully they'll make it this Saturday. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we'll remind folks that it is this particular exhibition is on view through May 4th, Saturday, May 4th, it'll come down. And another show goes in, but I think not until the 1st of June, the studio system goes up, which is also a very unique show where artists are selected and there's no opening reception, they actually go into the empty studio space and create. And then at the end of the show on the 30th of June, so they get like a month-long in-house residency. It's really a really unique.
Yeah, that's fun to go visit while they're working. And
Yeah.
they also get to network with each other. So that's really exciting, sort of interesting idea. Mhm.
Well, I thank you so very, very much for joining us today. I put a link to your website because for time, you have an extensive, a very, very impressive biography. And for time, I did have to cut that, but I would encourage people to head to your website to see not only your work, but read a little bit more about you, where we're just, as I mentioned before we went live, every single artist that has had the opportunity to do a talk with us about the show has talked about not only the selection. So I guess they had three, they sent in 3 pieces and one was chosen. And so they were very appreciative of, the attention and care that was kind of given to that selection process. But
Oh,
also
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
just the way that as you just said, the goal was it was not a competitive atmosphere at all.
No, I mean, it's a, a meeting of like minds. I mean, Max is also a painter, so we come to it as painters, with an interest in, in the field of painting, contemporary painting. So that's why, I think everybody felt that same connection.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.